In front of me is Salome Zurabishvili, a French-born Georgian politician and a presidential candidate. Mrs. Zurabishvili, thank you for the interview and welcome on the program. Just before we start, I would like to make a short disclaimer. We are talking with you just days before the elections, which are held on the 28th of October, but we air this program on the 31st, just after the elections. What are your expectations? What are the chances that you can meet this 50% mark and become president of Georgia as a result of the first round?
My impression is very good. It's quite difficult, and you know the post-Soviet countries, it's quite difficult to trust completely the ratings because we don't have the scientific base that makes them completely reliable. So I don't rely much on the ratings. I much rely on my intuition. So I'm hopeful.
What does it say?
I'm hopeful. The rest depends on the electorate, of course. So.
You have mentioned the polls, and I have recently read some polls that were published, and the outcomes of these polls are strikingly different.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, but does it mean, this, and it very much depends on on the body or on the organization that sponsored the polls. One sponsored by Rustavia 2 says that you won't be able to get even to the second round, whereas the other one, which is sponsored by the ruling party Georgian Dream, says completely the opposite, that you will become Georgia's president as a result of the first round. So have these polls become a manipulative instrument in Georgia?
They have not become, they've always been, and as I said, there is little scientific base for the opinion polls, so we better not be too much relied on the polls. I think the main difference is the difference between the candidatures, the trust in the population, and that's why I'm hopeful.
I guess from what I see that the Georgian society is increasingly apathetic when it comes to politics, and probably that's why one of the reasons, politics, I mean political parties.
Parties, not politics.
Political parties, yes. You position yourself as an independent candidate, but you are supported by the ruling party, Georgian Dream, which is chaired by Georgia's richest man who controls the country politically. So it's a wide consensus in all over the world. You sat together today at the final meeting with your supporters. So you're an independent candidate only rhetorically.
Not really, because I have an independent past.
But we're talking about present.
No, I'm going to come to the present, I fully agree. But I've been an independent, I had an independent party that was not affiliated to anyone. I never moved to any other party, which is quite rare in Georgia, that people tend to go wherever they can fit at one point in time. I've been an independent deputy. And I was the same with Saakashvili. I was supported by Saakashvili when I came as a foreign minister. But when it didn't match with my principles, when I realized that this was no longer building the democracy that I thought I was coming for, building a European-style society, then our ways departed. So I'm in the same position here. I'm independent because I presented my candidature before the ruling party made the decision whether to present one of their own and then who they were going to support. So that process came after my decision to run as an independent candidature. And I will be on one side I'm supported and I'm thankful for that. On the other side, that doesn't change me and my principles. So there will be I'm sure times for cooperation and collaboration because that's one way for the president to be effective in all these society issues, which
so
I
you are
think,
not controlled by Bidzina Ivanishvili?
I've not been controlled by anyone in my
okay.
life.
You are not highly influenced by his authority, by the fact that probably, I don't know exactly, of course, probably you are supported only also financially, because he has a lot of financial means to support.
Yes, but no, not directly, because there is a law that prevents Georgian Dream of supporting me. There are people that might be supporting me more openly because they think that since he is supporting me, they want also to support me. So there are these type of links that probably exist. I've been also supported by many of the businesses that do support me because they know that I've been both independent and at times supporting businesses from pressure that have intervened. And I'm supported by another group personally, I mean, and not through Georgian Dream, by the groups of professionals that know me and think that this society has to move to be more society of independent professionals and not apparatchiks or less apparatchiks. So there is this mixture of all peoples. And no, I'm not going to be controlled by Mr. Ivanishvili because I didn't have any agreement with Mr. Ivanishvili before being supported by them. It was a choice taken by Otsneba. I didn't have any preconditions that on this or that issue I would have to take this or that position. So it's all going to be depending on the issues that we're going to have, because I don't have links to...
You're always referring to Saakashvili's
because those are my two experiences.
As president, and as far as I know, you quit politics in 2010, and you were quoted as saying there is no effective democracy in the country. It's very hard for opposition to fight for power. Has Georgia...
to even express itself. That was my...
I'm sorry for not being that accurate, but I just communicated the sense of what you were saying back then. But my question is whether Georgia has become a more democratic country in a decade after Saakashvili stepped down.
Of course.
And then another question, Nachfrage in German we say, and the fact that Ivanishvili controls everything does not prevent Georgia from stepping away from democratic principles. I mean, he controls all branches of power in Georgia.
Well,
that's what all experts and
he doesn't control more than what Saakashvili controlled at his time. He controlled also parliament. That's why I said that the opposition could not do. We were only on the streets. Today, the opposition is not the majority. There is a constitutional majority, but there are two strong opposition parties in the parliament that have their say, that even had one investigative commission that they were heading. That never happened. The parliament was 100% controlled by Saakashvili. The local power is the same. There is not much, I must say, on the local power, but there are some local authorities that are not controlled, and the medias are not controlled at all. The medias were 100% in the hands of Saakashvili. Today you have 5 televisions that are in the hands of the opposition. So we are now in a free expression democratic country where maybe the balance of power is not yet enough, where there should be more multipartism. That's what Georgia is always wanted to be heading for. And for the rest, I'm not sure that Ivanishvili controls as much as he's talked about. There is more this sense that he must be controlling everything.
When did you last meet Mikheil Saakashvili?
Last was a day when I later that day called the meeting on the hippodrome. Was the last time we had a discussion, if that's what you mean.
Yes.
The other last time was I was in the opposition, and it's a very famous picture where we were meeting the opposition with Saakashvili, and he walked by me and he didn't shake hands.
So it was in 2000.
It was no, it was before. It was 2007 probably, or something like that, 7 or I don't remember the dates.
Regarding to the position of Georgia's president, not everybody knows that it's highly a representative position rather than a position that enables a president to execute real power. So it's like more or less the Queen of the United Kingdom. Why did you nonetheless decide to run for the presidential office? What was the motive behind it?
First of
because
all,
you understand that it's quite a symbolic role.
Well, I'm sure it's not.
But it's, according to the Constitution, it is.
Not even and according to the Constitution.
I read all the amendments.
Yeah, I worked on the Constitution, so...
You made it quite symbolic, the role of the president.
Well, let me explain. What does one mean by symbolic? First of all, this president is elected by the people, which is not the case for the Queen of England.
But later on it won't be so.
Well,
it's the last
we're
time.
talking about these 6 years, right? I'm not talking about the next president. I'm talking about this president. And what happens in 6 years' time in Georgia, we agree that we're not predicting the future. We have changed constitutions many times in this country. So I think it's not that symbolic. It's true. What is true is that it's a much less powerful position than it was before, especially under Saakashvili, but even under the last president, in terms of power competition, in terms of making the actual decisions of governing. But the big difference is that the new president has a huge range of powers that are not executive powers in the fields of the new rights, everything that is society rights, and how the society is conducted, what type of initiatives you can take, what type of legislative initiative you can push through, ask the parliament or see with the parliament. And this goes from gender problems to the environmental problems to what is the labor rights and defense of security on the jobs. Everything that makes this society, should make this society a real European society. And also changing the mentality so that never again do we go through a campaign like the one I had to go through. Which probably a Georgian woman living here and having children here would not have gone through. So this is the next change that I want to see in this country, and this is what interests me at my stage in my personal life. I'm not interested with the political battles. I've watched the previous president with so-called more powers, and I've seen the result of his years of his mandate, which is none. He has been in confrontation for personal power with the majority and has not managed to achieve anything that one can say will remain as his heritage. So I think that this new configuration, which is more adequate to the parliamentary regime in which we have moved, does not mean that there is not a lot of influence and leverage that the president can have on the society and on the regions, which I think are very important for tomorrow's development of Georgia, because we are very, in that sense, underdeveloped country with a structure that is Tbilisi and nothing else. I mean, all the other cities and small cities in Georgia are very less developed, and there is a big migration from there to the city, which is very unhealthy. And that is also something that the president, with a local administration and a local population, can work about to find new ideas and initiatives for development.
But and I read your program, I'm sorry for the interruption, I read your program and it touches upon many different issues where you can potentially make a contribution, including the problem of occupied territories, including including NATO accession and deep social problems. But
no, deep social problems I mentioned, and I explained how.
Yeah,
I mean,
but these two important things, especially in Georgian-Russian relations, do you really think that you can bring some change in this respect?
Well, somebody that says that it can change the Georgian-Russian relations just by one side should not be believed, because changing the Russian-Georgian relations depends on both sides. So that's not a question of who will be on the Georgian side, the president, the foreign minister, the prime minister, but the president has, if anywhere, a big power of representation in the foreign field. And foreign policy, which I know quite well from my past, both in France and also in Georgia, because I was a foreign minister. I know that it depends a lot on personal initiatives, on ideas, and on contacts. Three things, plus experience, which I have. But in our case, it will depend on our relationship with our European and American partners. It does not depend on a direct new type of relationship with Russia that would go alone without those partners. And to try to figure out with our partners what would be the new ways for Georgia to move from this rather stagnant situation where we cannot do anything with these occupied territories to a new stage. We need to work a lot. We need to have a lot of new ideas, discuss them with Americans as well as Europeans, and see where is it that we can move. For instance, on the occupying line, which is a very big problem, increasing big problem for Georgia, because it's almost now every other day that we have people that are abducted from there, and where practically we're not doing anything. We have to discuss with the European mission here, but also with people in Brussels, to see what are the additional measures that could be taken without, and that's the difficulty in this sense, without consolidating that as a border, because that's our red line. And that's where experience, knowing the people, being able to discuss beyond the scene and not going immediately into official discussions can be very interesting. You will get some result or maybe not, but that's the way we have to do things.
While you were talking about the problem of occupied territories, you mentioned only the United States of America and Europe. You didn't mention Russia. If you become president of Georgia, will you go to Russia to meet Vladimir Putin? Because the key to resolve the problem is in his hands.
Today, no, because today there is no move at all from Russia. So today to be saying that the key is in the hands of the president of Russia means that there is no key, because there is no sign whatsoever, either in the declared policies or on the ground, what we see happening every day, both in Abkhazia and in the Trin Valley region. There is no sign that Russia is moving. So I'm not saying that we cannot expect that, and that's why I'm saying that we have to be very close to American and European partners, because they are going to be probably having some discussions with some confrontation or not, depending on how it works. And if there is a change that happens in Russia, it will happen as a consequence of the type of relationship they have with our two main partners. And that's why we have to be ready to benefit of something if there is a benefit to be taken, or to be very cautious if they are things that are decided without us being aware of that. So it's going to be a very carefully balanced situation, where the question is not whether one goes or doesn't go to talk to Putin, at least at this stage.
This year marks the 10th anniversary of this 5-day war between Russia and Georgia, and you said that basically Georgia yielded to Russian provocation. So do Georgians share this viewpoint at large?
Yes. Not only Georgians, the whole international community. It's only the 15% that support the UNM.
But you were attacked because of this remark.
By them, and because they have 5 televisions to reproduce their attacks, and a good organization in the social network. But you can ask anybody on the street, everybody. I mean, that's the same thing as comparing democracy with the previous regime. We're talking about something that happened 10 years ago, where everybody has a memory of what happened 10 years ago. Everybody knows or has somebody in the family that was in that war, and everybody, and it has circulated now very much again on the, remembers what the Talevini Commission has said, what McCain has said, what the American ambassador then has said. So it's nothing new. The question is not to change the, and that's what he was badly interpreted. The question is not to change the culpability. Russia is the only one aggressor in this situation, and never has Georgia invaded Russia or been the aggressor. I mean, that's absurd. The question posed is another one. It's an internal Georgian question. It has nothing to do with relieving any of the faults of Russia. It's an internal question. Could the Georgian government, and that's a question that should be asked to the next president, could the Georgian government have done more to avoid the provocations when every other day the American counselors were coming, or even the Secretary of State were coming to say, well, we know there are provocations increasingly.
I would like to talk more about your background, which is quite interesting, because you were born in France and you are a French career diplomat who became a Georgian politician. But your relatives, as far as I know, moved in the very beginning of the 20th century to France, and they were political emigrants. Mm-hmm. Who were your relatives and why they were forced to flee the country back there?
So the decision was that of my grandparents. They moved because of a Russian aggression. Again, we are in the same situation that repeats itself. In 1921, after the first independence of Georgia, in 1918, those 3 years of independence were crushed by the invasion by the Russian army. And at that time, the people that were in government or around the government left for what they thought was a very short time, and they left to Turkey, in fact, thinking that they were going to keep alive the government in exile in order to be able to return as soon as the Russian army, which at that time was not very strong, would be defeated by the partners that were still fighting the new. But it so happened that this exile took longer than what they thought. Turkey remanded with Russia at that time, and then the Georgian official immigration had to move to France, which was a country that continued to recognize the government in exile the longest, until 1934. And then when France signed a treaty with Russia in 1934, then in that treaty was included a clause that said that France had to stop recognizing officially the government in exile. But then the immigration stayed in France, which remained as a main host country for the Georgian political immigration, which was a small immigration.
What could you respond to those who criticize you or who just make a remark that your Georgian is not perfect, that you have some French accent?
My son has less accent than me because he has a better. But yes, I've lived. The first time I came to Georgia I was 36 years old, and the Georgian I had learned in my family, and then by myself reading and translating. I was not a Georgian learned either in school or university, and during all my youth, practically we had no contacts with Georgians except for those that were living in the immigration. There was no social networks, there were no TVs, so the language was really a home-based, I would say, language. So I'm quite proud of it. I don't have any problems, and it's very interesting that the criticism has started 2 months ago. I've been living in the country 16 years. I've been foreign minister, I've been in politics, I've been elected as member of parliament, and there was never a word except for people saying, well, that's extraordinary that you have kept the language, and it has started now as a... But that's not a problem, because I have an excellent comparison, which is the President Vika Freiberg, who was also immigrant from Canada and returned to her country, to Latvia. She was elected president. She was criticized for a language not being good enough. She was elected president, and she was the one that brought Latvia into EU and NATO. So I'm ready to be criticized if I can manage the same result.
Mrs. Zurabishvili, thank you very much for the interview,
Thank
and
you.
I wish you best of success.
Thanks a lot.